Welcome, everybody. Hope your bellies are full, so your minds are going to clear up, or that's the hope anyway. Thank you so much for being here. And those of you who are online, apologies for our late start. We know you're going to enjoy this presentation, and I'm very grateful for Bill because he agreed to do this with a little begging on my part. But many of you have asked for information on this, and who better to advise us in this area as someone that's successful and with the respect that we all have for Bill. So without any further, my wonderful husband, Dr. Bill Kent.
This is a little scary, but I wanted to thank him for inviting me to do this because actually it's one of my favorite topics. Okay, it's one of the keys to living a happy, stress-free life is to have a little money in the bank. If you have it, you'll agree. If you don't have it, you'll agree. Do we all agree on that?
Yes.
Okay. So let me open with a couple of 50,000-foot level thoughts, and then we'll go down into the grassroots. Time is finite. It's a finite resource in your life. You only have so many days on this earth. Trust me, when you're 77, you know for sure that sooner or later, I don't have a 20-year plan anymore. Okay, so for all of you young faces, it's kind of an interesting thing because you don't think about your life cycle. You just think about today or maybe next week or even next year, but you generally don't think about that. And the other thing is that money is an interesting topic because most people don't want to discuss their money situation. In other words, you're willing to talk about your secrets or your love life or how much you weigh or all that other kind of stuff that's personal, but you don't want to talk about money in general. It's just a natural thing that I can't quite understand. So for me to give you insight into how I think about investing, because this is not how I make my living. Well, in some ways it is the way I make my living, because you can count on the reality that the reason we are where we are today is because I've been a saver my whole life. In other words, we could never have gotten so many people in the room here had it not been for the idea that when the company made money, the vast majority of the money stayed in the company because capital is a limitation in every business. If you don't have money in your business, you're screwed. It's that simple. Okay? So that makes me a lot different. A lot of people, not most, but well, in America, probably most people spend everything they make, and a lot of people spend more than they make, which creates stress, which is one of the big issues. So what you want to do is think about yourself as a small company. You are the Maria de la Peña Hoff Inc. Enterprise, or the Anthony Alvarado Inc. Enterprise. If you think about yourself that way, then you can step out of your daily thought patterns that may be getting you in trouble, and maybe this will help you create some wealth for yourself on a long-term basis. Okay? I'm different because I'm an entrepreneur capitalist. In other words, I've been willing to take managed risks literally all my life. It's just the way I am. Okay? Not everybody's that way. The reason people work for a company is because they don't want the risks that come with being in business for themselves. And yet, as I just explained, for the most part, each of you is in business for yourself from another point of view. Okay? So this is kind of where we get to where we are. So I want to tell you some personal stories. The first one is about my move to Florida. Because I didn't know a single person in Broward County, Florida, when I showed up here in early February of 1972. But yet 10 years later, I was building a building here. Okay? So I didn't have a lot of money in the bank, but when I was with the General Electric company, And my starting salary when I joined GE in 1965 was $5,900 as a professional engineer. How about that? But what I was able to do, even from the get-go, when I got a wife and a kid showing up in 1967, I was still saving a little bit of money. But I wasn't happy with that. So what I did was I got a second job at night. I started selling insurance. There was a new insurance company in Cincinnati, Ohio, and they had what they called a founder's contract where they went out and sold. It was basically a whole life policy. And they had a particular sales and marketing system that was really good. So I basically sold a lot of insurance to friends, starting with relatives always, and then friends, and then it grew from there. And so in a 2-year period, I was able to get enough money in the bank, thanks to that extra work, so that I could actually start investing in the stock market. And I did in the 60s. And the stock market really wasn't a great growth period in the stock market if you go back and look at the history. But I did, and I kept saving that money and investing that money. And then in 1972, my life hit a little bit of a crossroads. And driving back from a visit to Florida, I turned to wife number one and I said, we're moving to Florida. Because I had in my gut the idea of going into business, starting a new business that didn't exist, and that was a franchise system for swimming pool service. Okay? So I go back to Cincinnati. I tell my boss, he was the president and I was the COO, Chief Operating Officer, that I'm leaving. He about shit his pants. And he said, well, whatever they've offered you, I'll give you more. And I said, no, Roger, I'm going to go into business for myself in Florida. It was really that simple. So I came down here, started a pool service route because I really had never done pool service, and yet I was going to do a franchise. And then I got to meet Earl Horner at this building right across the street, the 810 building over there. And he had a couple of employees, and he wasn't very successful. And then one day when I wasn't even here a month, he and I sat down because he was having trouble. And I walked out of the door after listening to his problems and said to myself, you know what? If he'll take on a partner, I'm going to become his partner. And I gave him my entire life's savings for 20% of Horner equipment. I don't think I've ever told this story in public before. Okay? But I insisted I could become a partner in the business, 50-50. And so we had a formula, and in a couple of years, I owned 50% of the stock. And then at the same time, he got sick. Long story short, in 1975, I bought his half of the company out. And that's how we got to ultimately where we were today, okay? And then I bought the building, and then I bought the building next door, and all that, and we just kept growing. We started an export company in 1976 for the Caribbean. And then in 85, we made the big breakthrough and went global by buying that little export company in California, and the rest is history. But I don't want to get too far into that. What I want you to know is that you have to take some risk if you're going to get any reward. And on the flip side of it, if you don't take any risk, if you take zero risk, leave your money in the bank or spend it all, then there's an opportunity cost, okay, for not doing something. That's the part people don't think about, is the opportunity cost that you lose if you do nothing. So you have to do something. One of the other interesting things about me and money is, in 1964, I graduated from the University of Cincinnati, and with a degree in physics, okay, had a job, which I stayed at for less than a year before I switched to the General Electric company. And when I graduated from university, because my dad made me pay half of everything going through, I still lived at home, but I had to pay half of everything else. I had $180 in the bank when I graduated from college. Guess what I did with it? I closed the account and sent the money to the Catholic grade school that I grew up in, St. Anthony's, in Madisonville, Ohio. So I started with 0. Okay? Isn't that cool? Standing here today, it's pretty cool for me. So that's how it started. And what I've really done here is give you my best ideas, not just on investing, but also on values, because your value system comes into play in every decision you make in your life. So we'll start the PowerPoints, even though PowerPoints are now being discussed as being not so good on presentations anymore. I'm still going to use it as a crutch. So here are my personal beliefs. And by the way, anybody who wants this PowerPoint can have it. Just send me an email and I'll forward it to you. I also have some handouts that are summarized. So these are the big ideas that I came up with in thinking about this seminar for you guys. Now, number one is, at 77, I still believe that staying employed is healthier than being retired. That sucks, in my opinion, retirement. I mean, someday Mike Dooley's going to call me and say, hey, the wheels have spun off, you should go home. Hi, Mike. But he hasn't done that yet, so I love every day that I'm here. It's really a privilege to serve all of you. And that's been my attitude since those pictures were taken back in the 80s. Number two is you should pursue your passion in life. This is beyond just your job. If you're not happy here because you don't like the work and you can't get changed in your work assignment here, then go find someplace else to work. Because you only have so many days on this earth, and you should be pursuing what you love to do. So if you don't like your job, find one that you do like. And then there's there's the 7 vices and the 7 virtues. Well, here are my 3 P's which fit into that. Prudence, patience, and perseverance. The 3 P's, my 3 personal 3 P's. And these apply directly to investing money. Okay? Prudence. You can buy some high-flying stock, like Tesla, for example, since I'm now a big fan of Tesla, or you can buy companies that have a long history of making money. Okay? I've never bought Tesla because Chris Niles and I have agreed that we're only going to buy companies that have a long history of making money. Did we miss something? Because I've known about Tesla for quite a while. Yeah, we did. It went from $100 a share to $250, and that was 6 months ago, and now it's up around, I don't know what it is, $500 or $600 a share, because the market, the herd on Wall Street have all figured out, this guy's got something going here. He's going to do $3 billion in cars. He just opened a factory in Shanghai, although it got closed. I heard it got closed because of the coronavirus crap. Okay, and where's the world's largest car market? Anybody know? Where is the world's largest car market? China. China's got a bigger car market than we do. They got 4 times as many people as we do. Huh? Think about it. Okay? So anyway, the 3 P's are there. And then another one that I wrote one of my monthly newsletter articles about sometime last year, I think, was what's more important, motivation or discipline? So there's advantages to both. You know, you got to be motivated. You got to want to do something. Everybody in this room is motivated to make more money, right? Anybody disagree with that? Okay. But do you have the discipline to do what's necessary to make more money by creating more value for the company you work for? Or you could go into business for yourself if you wanted. But let's just say stay within the confines of being employed somewhere. Discipline's more important than motivation, because everybody wants more of everything, but who's willing to pay the price using discipline as a basic value system? And then that last little one there is from Winston Churchill in World War II when they were getting bombed by the Germans and all that. never give up, okay? Because I had wanted, for example, I had wanted to get a doctorate in business since 1985. I actually applied at Stanford University when we opened when we bought the company in Palo Alto, the export company. I had applied at that point in time, I applied to Stanford to their graduate school to get a doctorate in business. And they told me no. That's their loss. And and the first time I ever met Dr. Kaiser, about 20 years ago now, first thing I told him was, I asked him a question, do you have a doctorate program in your graduate school for business? And he says, no. And I said, well, if you ever do, let me know. So then in December of 2011, he walks into my Vistage group meeting, hits me in the ribs and says, we just got accredited for a doctorate in business. And I said, well, Art, I'll be over tomorrow and I'm signing up as your first student. So on January the 1st, 2012, I started a 37-month program and got what I wanted because that was what was inside of me. Most of the doctoral students are there to get a better job, to make more money, blah, blah, blah. That wasn't my motivation. I just wanted the spiritual satisfaction of getting the highest degree in the stadium that I love to play in, the great game of business. That's what we're playing, the great game of business here, okay? So never give up. And I was the only 72-year-old in the class of 2015. How about that? Okay, so we're gonna stay at 50,000 feet for a little bit by using some basic building blocks to think through the idea of investing. First of all, what is capitalism? Because investing wouldn't happen if it wasn't for capitalism. Okay, so there's your definition. It's a voluntary exchange of goods and services. Voluntary is the key word. In socialism, whether it's Cuba or Russia, there's no voluntary exchange. They used, until 1983 in China, they didn't have a voluntary system of exchange between goods and services. Everything was done by the government, called central planning. And it never worked, and it kept them as a third world country. And then in 1983, without getting into all the story about it, they changed that policy, and look at where China is 30 years later. It's amazing. Amazing what's there. And then what is it that makes capitalism really work? Is that when free enterprise combined with private property rights, innovation, and the rule of law, which if you don't have the rule of law and private property rights, you don't have a country. Because all a country is an idea, right? Just an idea. It's not a physical place. It doesn't have to be all physically connected. Look at the Philippines or look at America. It's got Alaska stuck up there and Hawaii stuck out there in the ocean. Okay, so it's not a physical place. A country is just an idea that everybody's agreed on. Okay, and so anyway, you can read the rest of that. And then in terms of a great definition of how to provide leadership from this book called Conscious Capitalism, that's how it got on the same slide. Leadership is just trusteeship. You have to be responsible if you're going to be a leader, and you have to be fair to everyone that has a stake in the business. It's called stakeholders, okay? So that's kind of that. So now let's define, now that we've defined capitalism, let's define investment, okay? It's an outlay of money, usually for income or profit. You want to make money if you give your money, instead of spending it today, if you give it to somebody else and say, I want to give you this money, but I want to make a return on that investment, ROI, okay? Number one thing that fuels what we just did in France, for example, okay? There's an ROI, and Mr. Dooley is all over that ROI to make sure that it comes true, so that in 3.7 years, we got our money back from that acquisition, okay? That's how it really works. Okay, so you're gonna try to make a profit if you give your money to somebody else, like if you bought General Electric Company or the S&P 500 index or whatever you decide to do with your money. It's a matter of, in the future, you want to have more money as a result of giving them over time. That's a key element. You want to give them you want them to give you back more than you gave them, okay? So what are reserves? Basically, in terms of how you should think about your daily life, what's a proper cash reserve? And I would say it's 6 to 12 months of expenses, okay? You have that already, okay? If you don't have that, then your first job is to get enough money in the bank through habits of saving so that you do have some reasonable reserve. If you're living from paycheck to paycheck, there's a lot of stress involved in that, okay? A whole lot of stress. Okay, and since we're in the pool business, I kind of like, if you think about your money as this vase or this cup, and I pour in so much every payday, and then I pour out what I spend, then you have to, okay, you have to leave some in the cup if you ever want to build a reserve. So if you don't have that as a reserve, that should be the first focus of your new investment plan. Invest in yourself, okay? So that, and then after you get that first 6 months of reserves, now let's talk about Wall Street, okay? All right, so I'm gonna talk about spending. Where does it go? It goes to your both essential and discretionary spending habits. And everybody in America is, almost all people in America have some discretionary spending, okay? And so there's the essential stuff that you have to have, your food and your housing and stuff like that, although you can make a mistake and buy too big a house and then not be able to afford anything else, or too big a car payment and not be able to afford anything else, because you haven't thought it through yet in terms of the strategic impact of those little decisions on the overall result. So those are your home, your furnishings, your car. Everybody's got to have that. Okay, and then there comes the question of debt. Okay, there's the long-term kind where you buy a house with a bank loan, and then the short-term kind where you just use your credit card and pay for your discretionary and other necessary expenses. But it's all forms of debt at some point in time cost money, don't they? Okay? And leverage can be both good or evil. You can have too much leverage and running backwards and the cup runs dry if something bad happens, and then you can have good leverage. Like how we've operated here in the company is we've mostly, when we built this building, I couldn't have built the building without a bank loan. So I did the bank loan before I built the building. Okay? When we bought, as we grew and we got more capital in the bank over at AquaCal, we now have 10 buildings over there. And in all those 10 buildings, we bought them cash. But the first thing I told Gary Chisling to do after we bought them was to take a loan on them. Because in today's complex world, a lot of times real estate has complications when you take a loan. So we found out, we did all the due diligence to make sure that the building was okay for a bank loan, but we didn't actually take it, we just bought it. And then later, to prove it, and the only reason I wanted to prove it is, well, if something unforeseen happened and I needed to sell it, and I found out then that it couldn't be sold because of some EPA problem or something like that, then we'd have been screwed. So that's how we've done what we've done on the buildings. Because when you bought the company from me, I think you bought 20 buildings as part of the deal. 20. Okay, a bunch of them over there, but then a bunch of the branches also. Okay, because I didn't want to do it twice. I didn't want to get involved in that. Okay, so now let's get back to you guys. Okay, we've had enough talk about the 50,000 foot level, and I need to stay on track because I just looked at the clock. I've never done this one before. Okay, so your net worth matters. In other words, we have a balance sheet for the company, and you can make a balance sheet for yourself, and you should, okay? And if you need technical help doing that, it's your assets minus your liabilities. But I'm happy to talk to any one of you one-on-one later if you want help from me. And of course, Color Me Healthy as a coach, and there's a lot of resources out there. So when you subtract your liabilities from your assets, you know what your net worth is. And most hard assets are only worth what someone else is willing to pay for it. In other words, if you overpay for a house and then you put it on the market because of whatever happens later, and if you overpaid, you won't get back all your money. That's not good, is it? Okay, so you have to be prudent using one of the 3 Ps when it comes to what you buy. I mean, there are some intrinsically bad investments. Cars is, what else can you buy other than a car that you could spend 20, 30, 40, 50, $100,000 on? And the minute the wheels hit the curb, it's worth 20% less than that. Guaranteed. So that's the worst investment you can make from a financial standpoint. So you got to be prudent about it. You need a car. It's essential for life in the way we live, but you have to have a new one. You know, leasing is just basically another form of borrowing money, and you don't own the car at the end. So that always costs you more money in general. In fact, until about, I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago, we always bought our cars for cash in the company. Because we always built up the reserves because of my saving mentality, okay? So you have to think about whatever you buy, if it's a boat or a car, whatever, what's it going to be worth 5 years from now? Is it going to be worth more or less? Your investments in the stock market in general will always be worth more, and I'll prove that to you in a few minutes. But even real estate can depreciate. So cash is king, okay? And I said, like water going in and out of a pool, because we're in the pool business, even though we really don't probably half the people in this room can't swim, but that's a different issue. We're in the pool business, okay? But then there's other forms of liquid capital. For example, if you're in the stock market and you sell something because you want the cash, how long does it take to get that money? Any idea? 1 or 2 days maximum, depending on the time of day. In other words, if you sell it on Monday, you can have it for sure by Wednesday. You can pick up the cash. Okay, you can't do that with a house, can you? You decide to sell your house, what do you have to do? You got to put it up for sale. You got to wait for the broker, blah, 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 MLS, and 3 or 4 or 6 months later, depending on when they find a buyer that agrees with your price on it, then you get to sell it, and then you'll get the equity out of it. So time matters in money, okay? And of course, I always throw in, because I'm such a continuous learner, that bottom one there, investment in yourself. What could be better than investing in yourself? Especially when you work for a company that's going to be willing to pay your tuition. The only investment you got to make is your time. But that time investment will generate an improvement in your thinking quality and your thinking capabilities, which will, in the end, long term, give you better opportunities. Okay? But the spending habits are going to determine how much money is left in Maria's thing at the end of every month, aren't they? So that's a big deal. And I threw this slide in because I really like the idea of learning by teaching. In other words, just by preparing this seminar, I learned some stuff I didn't know before, because I spent a couple hours online looking at some of the articles that you can Google when you just Google this topic. It's amazing what you get. In fact, we're in an age now, unlike 20 years ago, where you can learn pretty much all of the information, all the knowledge that the human race has aggregated in history is now online. It's an amazing, amazing reality. Okay? So But if you teach your children, you'll learn yourself. That's the point. In other words, if you want to really learn something, teach it to somebody else. So if you've got kids, teach them how to save. Teach them about investments. Use my PowerPoint. It's not copyrighted. Okay, how do you create discipline? You create discipline by having a written agreement. That's how America is. We don't buy or sell anything here significant without some kind of a written agreement. We buy a company, we got a 20-page contract by lawyers making sure that we've covered every little thing about what can go wrong and what we're getting and all that. Well, the same thing can be true with your little company. Okay? Your little company, you, and if you've got significant others and family, can create a spending contract for yourself. It isn't that hard, really. Start writing it down, okay? Identify and quantify your fixed and variable expenses. Your discretionary expenses are especially important. If you can't figure out what they are, go back and look at your credit card bill and your checkbook. You'll be able to categorize them. Was this absolutely a necessity for life, or was this discretionary? Okay? And then figure out if you've got any leftover money, what you're going to do with it. How much are you going to save, and how much are you going to spend on discretionary stuff? Because we all have discretionary stuff like vacations and other stuff, right? We all have things we like to do. Fortunately for me, I've been able to blend what I really like to do into my business life. What I love is international travel and domestic travel, but mostly international travel. So I got customers all over the world because of that. Not just me, it's a team thing, okay? That's what Worldwide does. But everywhere I go, I probably can find somebody that I know and I like and I want to spend time with. So just got back from 2 weeks in New Zealand. Mrs. Kent can tell you all about it. Okay? Because we got really family down there, okay? So create a written contract for yourself and then start slow. Because a lot of you, when I sent out a little questionnaire about 3 weeks ago, tell me what you want to know about with this seminar. And a lot of it was, I don't know how to start. And that's good. First of all, it's good to acknowledge that you don't know where to start. And then just start, okay? Make the simplest plan you can and start with baby steps. By the way, Laura Costanza deserves the credit for all these pictures and graphics and stuff, because I just do it black and white, and she's magic with me, so we're a great team. And then after you've put your basic plan down, your spending contract, then prioritize things. Figure out what's really most important, what's not as important as the stuff below. You'll figure that out for yourself. You just have to spend some time again on it. And then write it down. The power of the written word is amazing. Okay, write it down and then create, if you can, if you're not in deficits like the federal government. You know, what's different is the federal government can print money, but none of us can. So they just keep printing it. Okay?
Yeah.
So I want to make sure I stay somewhat on track here. Hold on, let me find where I'm at. Again, I haven't done this one before, so we're kind of winging it here. Do a monthly review, just like we have a team meeting once a month. Well, there's a reason for that team meeting. That team meeting actually started in the 1970s as a breakfast meeting when we only had 3 or 4 employees. We went up the street. There used to be a Jewish deli up the street about a mile. It's an Indian restaurant now, I forget. And can't remember the name of it in the 70s. Brothers Cafe, that's it, it was Brothers. So we go up there at 7 o'clock, we'd have breakfast, and then at 5 minutes of 8, 2 or 3 of us would vamoose and come down and open the 8:10 up, because we knew the customers would be sitting there waiting at 8 o'clock, because that's when we used to open. So yeah, that's how the team meeting started. And then it got so long that we weren't finishing until like 10 o'clock in the morning, and we had outside salespeople, and they wanted to go because that's prime time for selling early morning. And we switched to the afternoon. And 40, whatever it is, years later, here we have it, still going on. But why? Because in one day, in 2 hours, as the owner in a very diversified business, I can get a touch of everything that's going on around this place. In other words, I don't want to know day to day everything that you're doing. If you need help or want to tell me something, I'm good with that. But I'm not out there trying to know everything about everything. Mike Dooley's already passed that threshold himself as the COO, because you just can't. We have an incredibly diverse business, and it's a privilege to serve in it. But it really depends on teamwork. And so each one of you have been given all of the authority that you need to match the responsibilities that you have, okay? So you can do the same thing on a personal level. Do a follow-up team meeting with yourself and whoever else is on your team once a month, okay? Another big thing is paying your bills on time. That's something we've always tried to take every discount we can. And we've always had the cash available to do that. When we've missed discounts and accounts payable, it's because of paperwork bureaucracy or billing issues. It's not because we didn't have money. And if you go talk to Lizzie Albano, she'll confirm that. And that's gone on now forever, all through the 80s and 70s. So you always pay your bills on time, but especially credit cards, because of all the money you can borrow, the absolute worst place to borrow money is from a credit card company. You're paying an incredible interest rate, okay? It's just dumb. Step 4, only borrow money when you have to. You're gonna buy a house or a car, I get it, okay? But make sure that you can afford the payments process. And then step 5, ask for help all the time. One of my habits is if we're out driving around trying to find someplace in Switzerland or wherever the hell it is, France, because I'm going to France for a couple of weeks to go interview our new customers that we're getting over there. There's 145 dealers, I think. So I'm not going to see all 145 of them, but I'm going to go talk to a bunch of them. And guess what I want to know? How can we do what we do better so that we can help you grow your business? Because if we can grow your business, you're going to grow our business. I'm very excited about this. Okay. So ask for advice. My point is if we're driving around some city that I don't know and I can't find something, I'm the first one to ask somebody for help. With GPSs now, it's a little easier than it used to be, but I still am good on doing that. Okay, so now let's get to the meat, even though it's 5 after 1. Tell your boss I couldn't shut up. But I just don't like talking in public when you're eating, because you're not paying attention when you're eating. You're paying attention to what you're eating and not what you're hearing. So it's a bad policy, and I just don't want to do it. So investing strategies. Here we get to the meat of it. Okay, the key concept, and I've already said it about 4 times, is time value of money. Okay, what is 100, in simple terms, what's $100 worth 1 year from now, 5 years from now, or 10 years from now? Well, it really depends on where you put it, doesn't it? You can put it under your mattress, and in 5 years from now, what's it going to be worth? $100.
Well,
But what's its really worth? What's its real worth in terms of purchasing power? It's going down. It's going down all the time because of the cost of living is going up. Forget what the government says. They manipulate their numbers because they can't afford increasing Social Security payments too much. So they got to manipulate their stuff. And I'm okay with that. I don't care. But okay, so that's the key thing, the time value of money. And one of my handouts, because I have a whole package of handouts, and it's like 15, 20 pages, so I only made a few printed copies, but it's available on a PDF. All you have to do is send me an email, and you'll get a copy of it, okay? It's on my desktop. So what's the rule of 72? Because this is important when it comes to investing. You have to understand, if you're going to make a gain every year, a return on your investment, the way you measure that is with the rate of interest or rate of return Okay, so a simple way of thinking about that is how long does it take money to double? If you give me $100 now, how long will it take before I want to give you back $200? You're investing in Bill Kent Enterprises, okay? Well, whatever that annual interest rate is, if you divide that number, if it's 6% and you divide that into the number 72, it'll take 12 years for that money to double. If I give you back 9% a year, it takes 8 years to double. Okay, it's right there on the screen. So that's called the rule of 72, and it's just a simple way of understanding the time value of money. Okay, because the dollar you have in your pocket today ain't gonna have the same purchasing power 10 years from now. That's a guarantee. Okay, so now let's just get to the market. I've put together just a few slides to give you how I think about investments, because literally all the money that you're paying me for the company, because that's what I did. I sold all of you collectively the company. All of that money pretty much has gone into the stock market, and a lot of it is being redistributed out through charitable giving, through the foundation. And you all know about that, right? Okay. So it's all there. Last year, our portfolio made about 30%. Amazing. Doesn't happen like that every year. In fact, I was stunned when it happened, but because this year it's down a little bit. But I'm going to give you a long-term perspective on this. Okay, so time, diversification, and the volatility of returns, what this really says, it's in this little box right here. This is a 20-year look at it, okay? And for most of you, you still have a 20-year plan, not like me, okay? Stocks will have provided a average return of 11.3%. So if you take 72 from the prior slide and divide it by 11.3, somebody give me that number. How long is that going to be before money doubles?
Over 6.
That's 6.5, roughly. 6.5 years from now, if I put $100 in there and the average return is just the same as it's been for the last 20 years, I'm going to have $200 in 6 years. Okay? If I put it in bonds, which are currently a lousy investment, I'd have 5%. And then if I mix it up, because I'm afraid or fearful of the marketplace, then I'd be at 8.9%. Okay. So I'm not going to, hold on. All right, so here's a 20-year perspective on a couple of very simple investments, okay? The key here is the S&P 500. Does anybody know what that is? What is the S&P 500?
It's not 500.
Hmm?
There are 500
Yeah,
companies that are.
The 500 biggest, best companies in America, okay? So if you invest in the S&P 500 index, which is just the aggregate of all 500 companies, that's the S&P 500 index, okay? And as you can see, this gold line, okay, is the highest one over the last 20 years. Okay? Well, what's happened in the last 20 years that would affect the value of investments? The crash. For those of you who were here in 2008, you got your payroll cut, didn't you?
Yes, we did.
Okay? Was probably the hardest single decision I've ever made as the owner of the business was to cut payroll across the board. But you know why we did it? Because it was more important for the company to survive than it was to have the employees keep their salary levels. There was no choice because we had already gone line by line through every single thing that we spend money on here, line by line, and cut everything we could to the bone. And we cut the marketing department overnight to 4 people, for example. And there were about as many people, right, Maria, as there are now.
Yeah.
So we're back in the fat, happy times again, aren't we? Yeah, it's kind of like eating pizza. If you eat it long enough, you know you're going to gain some weight, right? Okay. All right, so down here at the bottom, so my point there was March 2009, this is the same S&P 500 index, reached its bottom, okay? And how long did it take to get back to even? It took till March 2012, okay? So it took 3 years to get back to even, although it looks like it touched being back to even about 1.5 years before. Okay? And that's the worst collapse of the stock market valuations in history. Okay? So if you didn't need the money, if it's long-term money, if you didn't have to spend it for some reason during that 3-year period, you were made whole completely. Okay? Pretty cool, isn't it? To know that at some point in time, if you don't need the money in the next 2 or 3 years, you're going to get back to whole, even in the worst catastrophe in the history of the company, of the country. We shrank from 450 people to 290 people in 2008. Do you know why we stopped cutting heads in 2008?
You still needed them to function.
We reached the point of dysfunctionality. If we had gone below 290 employees, based on where the company was then, it's higher now, but if we had gone below 290, we wouldn't have been able to function, and the competitors who did not go away would have eaten our lunch. So that's why 6 months later, I had to do the payroll cut, because there was no other choice, because we had lost $2 million in that year where we had cut the heads. And we had already cut everything else to the bone. Okay? Business is a great game, but it's also cruel. Capitalism is cruel. You have to perform. When somebody tells me, yeah, I'm giving you all the business, I said, no, you're not. No, we're earning it. You're not giving it to us, we're earning it. And they always agree with me, by the way. Okay, so now you've got this little bit of cachet of money. Let's just say it's $2,000 or $3,000 and you want to put it in something. Down here at the bottom of this chart is where the returns would be based on the different kinds of things, gold, oil. Here's the S&P index, blah, blah, blah. Okay? But oil, gold, real estate trusts are for big investors, so that's not a thing for the average person. They don't fit so well. So let's look at the index that I've talked about in terms of the stock market. And by the way, if you've got a 401k plan, which, how many of you have a 401k plan? Almost everybody in the room. I wonder where all the people are who don't have a 401k plan. They didn't come, did they? You'll have to tell them. Tell them to come see me. Or go see Gary Chisling. He's even more rabid about it than me. So here's the real returns over, this is from the beginning of time, 1802 to 2017. If you don't believe the last 20 years, go back over history. And as you can see, if you put in $1, it's now worth 1.3 million. Okay? But what really matters is here, this is 1981 on, let's call that the modern era. Okay, so that's kind of the end of the charts as of yesterday morning, but then I got a little bit of extra thought overnight because I'm juiced for this seminar, okay? And by the way, this is Kim. Kim wanted me to make sure that you know that there's a financial coach available for you to use if you want, okay? You just call her or text her, that Kevin guy. I mean, I've met him. He seems like a good guy.
It's not Kevin, no, it's Shane.
Shane, I'm sorry,
Yeah,
Shane,
right, Shane.
whoever. But so he'll help you if you want him. But here are my key takeaways. Again, this is on the summary. So let's just go through them real quick. First, you got to be aware and disciplined about how you spend your money, because it's a limited resource in your life and in my life. You may think I have no limitations, but I do. Okay? My limitations are different than yours, thanks to the ESOP. But I still have them. I can't go buy a 747 like Donald Trump did, can I? Okay. Regular and systematic saving is the key to creating a long-term personal wealth. First thing you ought to do, step one, if you've got the discipline to save money, is to maximize the 401k plan. Does anybody know why? Why would you want to maximize your 401k?
It's pre-tax and
Is
it's
it?
pre-tax and match.
You don't pay taxes on the gains. If you have investments in an after tax in a earnings account, you pay taxes on the gains every time you sell it. Okay, every time you sell a stock, or you get dividends. Okay, when you've got it in a 401k, it accumulates tax-free until you finally take it out, whenever that is. Well, the difference is the rule of 72. If you're accumulating it without tax, and let's say your effective tax rate is 20% of what you earn, that means that your return on investment is going to be 20% higher, and it's going to double faster when you do the 72 calculation. Okay? So you want to maximize. If you haven't maximized it, that's the first place to save. And there's some very good investments inside of that 401k, because there's a whole portfolio of different ways you can do it. If you want some help on that, call Chris Niles, because he's the administrator of it, and he is the best guy I've ever worked with in my entire life on investing. He's brilliant. Okay? And then the number three, if you consistently, just as kind of a rule of thumb, if you can save 10% of what you make, you and your team, your financial team, if you're married and got two incomes, if you can save from that, by the time you get ready to hang it up, you're going to be in great shape. Okay? And there's Lloyd's phone number. He's the one that shows up here and does your 401k stuff most of the time. That's his phone number right there. And then, of course, there's the kicker. The kicker. You can't get out of it. You're going to save money if you work here, because I made sure of that personally. That's why that was the driving spiritual force behind the ESOP. Because I know about all this stuff that we just talked about, and I know that if you work here for a very long period of time and you're a part owner of the company, you are going to have a nice retirement benefit. But please don't take that as license to not do this. You should be doing things on your own, because there's no guarantee you're going to work here the rest of your life.
Oh, yes, there is.
Sorry.
Well, with one exception. I just can't seem to get rid of her. By the way, there's a picture of her up on the wall down there. And I think that's 1983, isn't it? Or something like that. What year is that, Rosie?
It's a long time ago.
You didn't have short legs.
No, I didn't.
Okay. Because of the coronavirus, I just added on overnight a couple of little bonuses. This thing is insane. This is a media. How does the media get paid?
By this.
By having you watch it, because their advertising rates are all dependent on how many people are watching it. Okay? So I've been telling people for more than 10 years, turn it off. You don't need to know. It's filling your subconscious mind with a lot of crap.
Fake news.
Turn it off. Okay, so here's a chart. The stock market has some insanity to it because it's psychological in a lot of ways. And I'm going to wrap this up in a minute. Okay? Here's the SARS outbreak in 2003. Okay? And then there's another one here. and measles outbreak and the Zika virus. Remember the Zika? There was a measles thing last year, okay? And here was the pneumonic plague in 1994 and AIDS in 1992, okay? What happened to the market? It took a little dip, just like it did this last week. But you didn't take your money out, did you? In fact, I know somebody who works here who had some money on the sidelines who put it in last week. Because the market isn't completely rational. It's emotional, okay? But on a long-term basis, again, 2 to 3 year minimum perspective, here's what it really looks like. Okay? This is 2008, the bottom. Okay? And there was the peak before that in 2007, just 2 years before. But I told you 3 years later, you were whole again. And now look what's happened to it in this era of globalization, which is a huge force in business. And no matter how bad the media and the government act and how stupid they are, they can't stop that. Because you know what? There's 7 billion people on this earth, and sometime this year or next year, 50% of the human race is going to be defined as middle class. Middle class meaning they got proper housing, they got proper food, they got education for their kids, and they got a little money in their pocket to spend on a discretionary basis. 50% of the human race. This is the best time in the history of man to be alive. You won't see any of that on the TV. Okay? But this is what's really going on. And my final one is, okay, the market. How does it value itself over time? Okay? Well, there's something called a price to earnings ratio. Okay? In other words, what's the price of the stock divided by how much money did it make per share? Okay? And the 25-year average is that the price is 16 times higher than the earnings per share. Right here, 25-year average, 16. Okay? So where are we today? We're, as of February the 29th, okay? We're right here at the same level. And this is, in statistics, there's something called standard deviations from the norm based on a body of data. And this is the plus one standard deviation. And statistically, data stays, I think it's 67% of the time, it's always within one standard deviation. Okay? So if you look at this, it got overvalued here in 2001, and then there was a crash, the 2001 crash, which hurt our company. We had a setback that time, okay? And then here's the crash 10 years ago, but right now, we are right in the middle of the zone. So the stock market is not overvalued. So is it a good time to invest if you know you're going to have this money in there for 3 years or 5 years or 10 years? The answer is yes. That's it. Questions? I know we're over time, but Julia can send me a bill.
Have you ever invested in options?
Have I ever invested in options? No. If I want to gamble, I'll go to Las Vegas or over to Nassau, but I'm not a gambler, so no. I do take flyers on individual stocks and when things happen. I'll give you a good example. Oil hit $29 a barrel about 3 years ago. I don't remember exactly what month it was. I called Chris Niles and I said, Chris, oil is $29 a barrel. Don't forget it was over $100 a barrel a few years back. I said, I want to buy some oil. So we did. We bought some oil. So within a year, it was back up. And I sold it last year at around 55. And now it's, I think today it's like 48 or something like that. And oil's going through its own dramas because of what's happened with the U.S. being an oil producer, a net exporter now, and you know, the Arabs and their deal, and they tried to fix the price, and that never worked. And you know, so I do take small gambles with a little bit of my investment. I play the game a little, but that,
So
not the mainstream stuff.
Stocks.
Solid 500 companies.
Yeah.
Yes, ma'am.
Do you think, I'm talking about life insurance, is term better than whole?
Insurance. There's a point in time in your life where you got kids and all that, and yes, insurance is necessary. Term is the only thing that makes any economic sense. When you buy whole life insurance, you're paying, not only are you paying a lot of commissions, you're also giving the insurance company the opportunity to use your money.
For investment.
Do you know how Warren Buffett made his billions? He started by taking over an insurance company. And he took that money and instead of putting it in bonds or government instruments, T-bills, he put it started buying companies with it. And that's how he became a billionaire, using insurance money. Yeah. Yeah, so no. Term, and then when you don't need it anymore, you get rid of it. So,
One more question.
yes, ma'am.
So I know we should invest in our 401, but let's say you have money laying around to buy land to build. What would you do?
Well, I'd put it in the stock market and let it appreciate until you're ready to buy the land. And then as long as you make sure that this land that you're buying has some useful purpose and going to provide a return on investment, then you pull it out and do it. Yeah, sure. Yeah. But real estate is not a guaranteed return on investment. Not in South Florida. Not in South Florida. Not anymore.
Where do you think it's going now? Because I mean, the prices of
It's crazy.
homes are ridiculous.
Anyway, thank you all for coming.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.